very much, Annie. I'm going to spend my slot speaking about blasphemy and apostasy in the context of Muslim and Islamic societies and Muslim communities around the world. I think these issues are important, they are pertinent. There have been a number of high-profile cases in the media, in recent years where these issues have come up. So to start with, I want to give a bit of historical context to what we're talking about. I think in the 6th, 7th, 8th century, the early centuries of Islam, Islamic faith, the idea of religion and political identity or political allegiance were inextricably linked. So these were essentially empires that were based on religion. So leaving the religion was construed as treason against the political authorities. It was assumed you would then go and join the neighbouring enemy political entity, and there'd be problems, and you'd instigate some sort of attack. So the punishment for apostasy was a political move rather than a theologically rooted Islamic concept. Now, as things changed with the rise of nation states, this idea began to collapse, and the Ottoman Empire in the mid-19th century actually abolished the punishment. The Grand Mufti of the Ottoman Empire, which was the most senior authority in the Muslim world at the time, abolished the death penalty for apostates. Now, Al-Azhar University, which is today still the senior most Islamic authority in the world, also abolished the death sentence for apostates in the mid-1950s, 1958 in fact. So things were, you could say, broadly moving in the right direction. But things have gone terribly downhill since then, and I want to briefly explore why I think things have gone downhill. I think the key turning point was 1979. 1979 witnessed three key events, which I think created a number of interesting changes in the world, which we are all suffering the consequences of to this day. Those three key events are, first of all, the siege in Mecca, the attempt by a group of hardline Salafists in Mecca to take control of the holy sites and subsequently overthrow the Saud royal family, which they deemed was corrupt and not Islamic enough for them. That led to an international crisis. The Saudis blamed the Iranians, but first they blamed the Jews, as always, then they blamed the Iranians, and finally they had to admit it was a domestic problem. That was briefly, and that was actually led by bin Laden's elder brother, actually, I should know that. That was followed by the revolution in Iran. A very unpopular Shah was overthrown, and led to an Islamic revolution in Iran. And then we had the war in Afghanistan, where Mujahideen, Muslims from all over the world descended on Afghanistan to fight the Soviets who had marched into the country. Now, these events led to certain things. They led to a Saudi-Iran proxy war, for example. So both states sought to fund and arm groups, Shia and Sunni groups in places like Pakistan and even in Europe and other countries around the world. It led to an empowerment, both financial and political, of extremist forces. Extremists that had been working very hard to influence society in the 60s and 70s were suddenly given a huge boost, because there was money available and politicians were prepared to pander to their extremist agenda. So with this empowerment of extremist forces from 79 onwards, it led to many things that have been discussed on this panel. But in particular, what I want to focus on, it led to more rhetoric around reviving, if you like, the death penalty for apostates and death for anyone who is deemed a blasphemer, relative as that can be. Now, this was convenient both for religious organisations, extremist religious organisations rather, and for political authority, because it was a tool with which you could crack down on political dissent, you could crack down on reformist, moderate elements within Islamic theology, and you could pursue personal vendetta. You could just accuse your enemy of being a blasphemer, as often happens in places like Pakistan. So this is what happened. Now, the Cairo, obviously most Muslim majority countries in which these trends are popular have signed up to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. However, there was a very spurious Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in the 1990s, issued by foreign ministers, of all people, of OIC countries. And this had a number of very alarming articles in there. I'll just read you one of the articles of this declaration, which I find quite disturbing. Article number 10 says, Islam is the religion of unspoiled nature. It is prohibited to exercise any form of compulsion on man, or to exploit his poverty or ignorance in order to convert him to another religion or to atheism. So that essentially paves the way for punishing anyone who leaves Islam. So you had these trends happening. You had groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Jamaat Islami in Pakistan, being empowered by the new changing environment, spreading their tentacles in Europe and across the Western world as well. And for those reasons that recently we've seen some very bizarre things, well, to the non-extremist mind at least, seem very bizarre. Very recently, and I wrote a piece for the CNN website on this topic, a woman in Sudan, whose name was Miriam Yahya Ibrahim, was sentenced to death simply for choosing to marry a Christian man. And it was deemed that, first of all, she was an apostate, because she had left Islam, and secondly, she was marrying a non-Muslim, both punishable offences. The first one being punished by death. She was also 8 months pregnant whilst this was happening, so she was incarcerated while she was heavily pregnant. Now, what's even more interesting about this case is she was actually raised a Christian by her mum, who was a Christian. She didn't actually leave any faith at all. She was a Christian all her life practically, and yet she's been deemed an apostate. International pressure is being placed in Sudan on this topic. I'm not sure what the latest is. Similarly, in Saudi Arabia, there's a chap called Raif Badawi, who ran a liberal blog for Saudi liberal bloggers. He was then sentenced to a 7-year sentence for insulting Islam, and now he's facing the death penalty for apostasy as well, because he's been deemed like he's actually an apostate. In Pakistan, and I'm sure my colleague Umar will elaborate a bit more on the Pakistan example, but there's been, a few years back we had the assassination of Salman Taseer. That was shortly followed by the assassination of Shahbaz Bhatti. These were two senior politicians who stood up for Asia Bibi. Asia Bibi, who was a Christian woman who was deemed to have offended Islam. And again, this is an example of people pursuing personal vendettas and using the Islam blasphemy to do so. Closer to home, my colleague, Majid Nawaz, tweeted a cartoon in which there's a picture of Prophet Muhammad and a picture of Jesus, and they're both saying hi to each other. He tweeted it not to endorse it, but to say, I don't find this offensive. As in, there was a debate around Muslims are too sensitive, and he was tweeted to make the point that look, not all Muslims are hypersensitive about these issues. I'm not offended by it, I think it's quite benign. I have the right to say that. After that tweet, he was issued with death threats, very credible death threats from around the world, and it just completely changed the way he had to conduct his personal life for a number of weeks thereafter. So this is not just, we're not just talking about rural Pakistan or Sudan here, we're talking about London in 2014, where this kind of mentality is still present. Now, another one of my colleagues, who Tahmina mentioned earlier, Osama Hassan, has actually produced a very, quite short, but it's quite comprehensive, theological rebuttal of the idea that Islam and free conscience are not compatible. It's called No Compulsion in Religion. I've got a number of copies over there if you want to take a copy. It's also free to download from our website. And this essentially makes the scriptural argument. This is actually the idea of having a free conscience, having the freedom in religion and freedom from religion is not necessarily contradictory to the Islamic principles and to scripture. For me personally, as someone who's more secular leaning, I believe that a free conscience is very important to any kind of progress. I believe no society can progress if it does not allow free debate, free exchange of ideas, and allow people to express their views, even if those views are blasphemous or deemed blasphemous. If you look at Europe, Europe was held back by the church for criticizing and for condemning people like Copernicus, for example, who were making scientific discoveries that they felt contradicted to the Bible. For example, the idea that the sun goes around the earth. It was the idea that's fundamental to Christian dogma. And so in this way we can see, historically dogma, whether it's religious dogma or any other dogma, has held back progress. And I think societies in which dogma holds back progress, in which social science and critical inquiry are discouraged, we can see the results that the societies are in. You just look around the world to see what I'm talking about. So as an organisation, as an alliance of organisations, this is a key issue, and this is an issue that we want to campaign on, and an issue that we would like to support on as well. Thank you.